Amen. I love hearing our men pray. I really appreciate that. We're going to switch the song up. Thanks, Tim. To Brethren, we have met to worship. I love that song. Can we find it in the back? Page 15. Page 15. Do you mind, Rachel? All right, let's go ahead and stand and sing 15.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim. That is a song I'm familiar with, so as is the last one. Amen. All 4 verses as we sing aloud for the Lord. Here we go. Brethren, we have met to worship and adore the Lord our God. Will you pray with all your power while we try to preach the word? All is vain unless the Spirit of the Holy One comes down. Brethren, pray and holy manna will be showered all around. Brethren, see poor sinners round you, slumbering on the brink of woe. Death is coming, hell is moving. You bear to let them go. See our fathers and our mothers and our children sinking down. Brethren, pray and holy manna will be showered all around. Sisters, will you join and help us? Moses' sister aided him. Will you help the trembling mourners who are struggling hard with sin? Tell them all about the Savior. Tell them that He will be found. Sisters, pray and holy manna will be showered all around. Let us love our God supremely. Let us love each other too. Let us love and pray for sinners till our God makes all things new. Then He'll call us home to heaven. At His table we'll sit down. Christ will gird Himself and serve us with sweet manna all around. Amen. You may be seated.
Judges chapter number 8. Judges chapter number 8. I believe this will be our last study of Gideon. And I know we take breaks here and there because of missions conference and pie and praise and so on, and so it drags along a little bit. I know the preaching doesn't, but the the schedule does a little bit. So Judges chapter 8, we discussed verse 22 and 23 the last time we were gathered together, and so I don't want to belabor the point, but Judges chapter 8 and 7 are the great victories of Gideon. Tremendous victory in battle. 300 men routed an army that was without number. 100,000, maybe 400,000, maybe 600,000. Numbers that we are just not familiar with, even in our 200 years of warfare, going back to the Civil War. A huge army was 30,000 moving at one time. 50, 60, 70,000 took days and days and days to get into position and maneuver. I think that they just had a much better system, as it were, to move men during the Bible times. And so they've got these massive armies that they're bringing to the field, and they're routed by Gideon. He's been up for, could have been as much as 24, 36, or maybe even 48 hours. He has defeated Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. He has dealt administratively with the different problems that happen with leadership, judging motives, and so on. And after all of that, he is offered in a sense, the deed to the castle. He is offered the kingship. In fact, later you'll find the people demanding a king, and Samuel the prophet saying, no, 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 but the people wanting it, and then of course Saul is chosen and so on, and we know the disaster that happened with Saul. But he says, no, I don't want to be king. And then they also say, well, it's not just you to be king, it's your son to be king. And it's not just your son to be king, it's your son and your son's son to be king. We want your family to be a dynasty over us because you've done all this. And we find that in chapter 8 and verse number 22. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son, also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And I know Gideon is known for his courage. He is known for his faith. He's also known for his fleece, you know. But I don't think we should look at the fleece as far as fear. I think we should look at the fleece as far as confirming the path that God has for you. There's nothing wrong with confirming what God wants for you. And so we know a lot about Gideon, but here we see his humility, his modesty, his courage to say no to promotion, to say no to prosperity, because he says in verse number 23, and Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you, the Lord shall rule over you. What a statement of humility. And we referenced to George Washington. How in the deep valley that America had gone through, out of the Revolutionary War, many people wanted George Washington to continue as the ruler, but he knew how important it was to step down after 2 terms and set up a great precedent for our nation. And so the modesty and the humility of Gideon, that was in verse 22 and verse 23. And then we're going to pick up the story in verse 24, and I want you to see, in a sense, the crack in the armor of Gideon's character, because God's book, the Bible, one of the reasons we know it's true, it's because it's an accurate accounting. And if man wrote it, man would have scratched out all their mistakes, would have eliminated them. The winner gets to write the history, you know. The winning country gets to write the history. And when a king came through and conquered a land, they would burn all the books that were against them and didn't put them in a favorable light. But that's not how the Bible is written. And so we start to enter into some mistakes that Gideon's making at the end of his life. And now I don't think he's intentionally making a mistake here. But look what he says in verse number 24. Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you, that you would give me every man the earrings of his prey. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. So when they had conquered these people, they were able to spoil the army. And the Bible says, and they answered willingly, we will willingly give, or they answered and we will willingly give them. And they spread a garment and did cast therein every man the earrings of his prey. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were about their camels' necks. This is the spoil that they've just gotten from the people that they conquered. And it's 1,700 shekels of gold. Shekel is about 2/3 of an ounce, or about 11 grams of gold. Rough calculations, let me calculate in my head, 42 pounds. And if it's $1,759 an ounce, rough calculation, $1.8 million. I'm so good with math. They're willingly giving the prosperity that God has given to them. God always rewards his servants. God always rewards his servants. Matthew 10, says, there's no man that hath left house or brethren or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my sake and the gospel's, that he shall receive, but he shall receive an hundredfold. Now in this time, houses and brethren and sisters and mothers, and so on. So God blessed them in the initial attack and this conquering of the people. He always blesses his servants, and they're generous now to give back to Gideon the things that they have gathered. But what does he do with it? And Gideon made an ephod thereof, verse 27, and put it in his city, even in Ophrah. There's different opinions on what this ephod is. We won't take the time to look at it, but if you look at Exodus chapter 28, verse 4 to 6, one of the priest's garments, the description of the garment is a fine linen with gold threads woven in the garment, and it's referred to as an ephod. So it could have been a very expensive robe with 42 pounds of gold woven in it. I think it's probably an image or a statue. And so he makes this image, statue, or possibly a garment, very expensive garment. Could it have been a trumpet to commemorate the trumpet that they used? Could it have been a golden sword, and it says the sword of the Lord and of Gideon? It could have been any of those things, and unfortunately, we can't look in the Hebrew and see his intentions. I wish we could. I wish we could open it up, and when we get to heaven, we'll watch the VCR tape of this event, the 8-track. But we don't know his intentions, and perhaps it was with good intentions, but he doesn't give it to the priests. If it was a garment that he had made it, he doesn't give it to the priests. He puts it up in his own city. And what happens? Verse number 27, and all Israel went thither a-whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. Oh, Gideon, 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 Gideon. Why? I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to really understand this. I did not grow up in a house where we worshiped idols. We didn't have that mentality. We could have carvings in our house. We could have pictures of grandma in our house. We could have those things in our house, and it didn't bother me a bit. I didn't walk by it and give obeisance to it. I didn't do any of that. It does not even affect my mind at all. And so when I go to a Civil War museum or to a battlefield and there's a horse and a general on that horse, the only thing it arouses within me is a memory or an appreciation for their battle. Like, wow, I didn't realize he was 10 feet tall. No. But, I appreciate the carving, and I'm the one of those that go to the museum and I read everything. How many are with me? Okay, good. How many don't read and they just walk right through? You're terrible people. No. My wife hates going to museums with me. I'm reading stay in this line to pay. Okay. Adults, this, okay. I'm reading everything in the museum. I paid $20 to get in this thing. I'm getting every single thing out of this. I'm pushing every button. I'm answering every question. I'm that guy. But if I was to see Gideon's trumpet or Gideon's sword or Gideon's garment, I love looking at those type of things because it reminds me of an event. I like to collect old Bibles. I have a Bible in my office that was 1880, 1890. I found at a used bookstore. I love those type of things. But that has no temptation for me at all to ask advice of it or try to gain favor from it. But in that time period, when you don't have a Bible, when you don't have church, when you don't have a culture that goes that way, that doesn't have that as part of their fabric, it was kind of there for the taking, in a sense. They were already tempted. They already had Baal worship in Gideon's very house he grew up with. Remember, they had the grove and they had the altar to Baal. And so here is this temptation, no matter how good his intentions are, here is this temptation brought right before the people, and they fell into it. Right after the humility and the deference and the modesty he shows horrible, in my opinion, horrible lack of judgment in creating this. What are your thoughts on that little bit of a schizophrenia, as it were, the two sides to Gideon just in these verses? What are your thoughts? Brother Ken? Yeah. So it could have been, he does say no to the kingship, but he's like, wow, you guys really appreciate me. Let me see what I can do. Good observation. Anybody else? Huh. Okay. Yeah. That's a great observation. Steve is talking about how Gideon needed a fleece to remind him, to prove that he was doing what God wanted him to do, almost like a security blanket, something to fill the insecurity that he has. And I don't want to denigrate him, but that's what it seems like. And even in this case, it seems like he's wanting some object to remind him of his authority, or remind him of God's provision, or God's hand of blessing on him in some way. And so perhaps that's what it was. Anybody else? Yeah. 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 It's a very interesting thing to consider and think about. The other part of this too is that the ephod came from the prosperity. It actually came from the victory. So they do right, they're righteous, God blesses, God brings prosperity, but it's the very prosperity that is used to make an idol, or something that was eventually made into an idol. Boy, it sounds a lot like America. It sounds a lot like when you do what's right, he that diggeth a pit fall therein. If you don't dig a pit, you won't fall therein. A couple of years ago, and it was probably a lot longer than I'm thinking, but anyway, it seems like yesterday. But coming into the backyard and Jackson's digging a hole. Jack, what are you doing? I mean, right in the middle of the yard. What are you doing? Digging a hole. Why are you digging a hole? Just digging a hole? This big hole in my yard. Like, fill it in. What's wrong with you? And guess what? There's still a hole there. He didn't get all the dirt back in, so there's still a hole there. But, funny thing, if you don't dig a hole, you won't fall in the hole. And that is in the Bible, actually. He that diggeth the hole, he that diggeth the pit falleth therein. And he that breaketh the hedge, I forget what it is. Something about a serpent biting him if you break the hedge. So if you do what's right, you're going to be prosperous. If you're lazy, you're going to run into problems. But if you work hard, you're going to be prosperous. And so here we are in America. We have worked hard. We have been honest. We have been proper with our work. We are prosperous, but it's the very prosperity that's getting us into trouble. It's the very money in our wallet that builds the giant stadiums that people worship on Sunday. It's the very prosperity. Now, some people have turned it around and said the problem is the prosperity. But I'd be hesitant about that, because if you're going to be rebellious with prosperity, what's saying that you're not going to be rebellious with difficulty? I don't know if it's the prosperity that's the problem. I think it's the heart that's the problem. And I'm not wishing for America to collapse in order to bring revival. I'm not wishing for that at all. Now, if that's what it takes, absolutely. If that's the only thing that America will listen to, I hope that God does take away the prosperity, because revival is way more important than prosperity. But I would hope and pray that God would not have to resort to that, because think of all the Bibles that won't get printed. Now, I understand God can certainly use a different country, and that is his business, and he is right to do that. But I certainly wouldn't want to be living in Ukraine right now, or in Russia or China, or in a country that is socialist, and so that we do not have the ability to help other people. I would hope that America would turn to God and stay prosperous so that we can still be the number one missionary giving nation in the world, and the most charitable, and where the Bibles come from, not for our own pride, but for the glory of the Lord, so that could happen. But it was the prosperity that turned into, good intentions or not, a thing that was possibly for good, but then eventually turned into an idol. Brother Seth?
Begin to elevate this instead of focusing on the power of God. And I think maybe Gideon was like, hey, here's a trophy of all the things we got, and this is a reminder of what God did. He allowed us to have this victory, this success. And it becomes this snare of you begin to worship the creature more than the creator. You begin to worship the idol, the thing, the physical reminder more than the power of the God behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir? Yeah.
And I know when we see those things, all these things that were made into weapons and stuff, and we found them, that was, hey, we got all this stuff out of here. That's good. We had a victory. And that's maybe what he wanted to show them, but they took it the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. Did this happen before with something else that was meant to be prosperous? Pastor King? Yeah. Brass serpent. Brass serpent held up, and people look and live. We sing about that. It's a great picture of Jesus Christ. It was used in John chapter 3 as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so will the Son of Man be lifted up. Do you know that serpent hung around till 2 Kings chapter 18? And they worshiped that serpent, and it wasn't until 2 Kings 18 where they finally took it and stamped it to powder and got rid of it. All that time, somewhere along the lines, I mean, it was carried through the wilderness, carried through the judges. It's in Israel somewhere while we're reading this brass serpent. It's there with Saul, with David, with Solomon. It's still there somewhere, and people are somewhere along the lines begin to worship it. Hundreds of years, it's still there. So sad that this would happen. And I want to turn to verse Jeremiah chapter 2. Jeremiah chapter 2. So quickly people can forget. So quickly we can forget what Seth said, the Creator, instead of we forget the Creator and we worship the creation. Jeremiah 2:32, Eric. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I was at an ordination, and one of the advices that they gave to the fellow they were ordaining is you're going to get a lot of people who are going to criticize, and they're going to write letters and say you're awful, you're terrible, and you're not worthy. And you're going to get a lot of other letters that say you're awesome and wonderful. He said, keep these for a day and keep these for 2, and then throw them both away. Don't listen to either one of them. But Brother Eric, Jeremiah 2:32. My people have forgotten me, days without number. My goodness, what an indictment. The example he gives, would a bride show up to her wedding and forget to bring her dress? Forget that it's her event. Forget that she should be looked at and honored and not have something special to wear. It is impossible. She's going to show up because that's important, and I'm sure there's a lot of other things we could talk about with her attire. He says, yet my people have forgotten me days without number. Continually want to go back to the creation instead of the creator. So that's a black mark, of course, on the reputation, at least, or the legacy of Gideon. Then we go now to verse number 29 of our text. And Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. He is now referred to again by his name that his father gave him after he chopped down the grove, after he destroyed the altar. And his dad called him Jerubbaal. I believe there's evidence to say that his father, Gideon's father, was a priest in Baal worship. If people disagree, that's fine, but there's at least evidence that seems to indicate that Gideon's own father was a priest in Baal worship, and he was supporting the worship of Ashtaroth, and he was supporting the altar of Baal. And so Gideon cuts down the grove, and he destroys the altar, and his dad is facing him, and the people of the city come, and this is all in the previous chapters, but the people of the city come and they say, you need to kill your own son. You need to kill him because he's now destroyed the temple. And his dad doesn't necessarily, in my mind, support him. He just says, now wait a minute, if Baal is God, then he can take care of him. If Baal is so weak that he can't even protect his own altar, and Ashtaroth was the bride of Baal, and that's where the grove of trees were there around Baal. So Baal was so powerful, somebody had to provide him a bride. Baal is so powerful, he's only stuck in one place at one altar. And so his dad says, well, Baal, if he's God, is going to take care of my son. You're not going to touch him. And he names him Jerubbaal, which means let Baal plead. Let Baal speak for himself. So here God brings up that name again, and he says, and Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. So I thought it was interesting that that name came up. After all that, it comes back up again. Verse number 30, and Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten. Wow. Wow, that's Christmas. That's big. You, Tim Carpenter, you thought you had a lot of people at your house. He had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem. She also bare him a son whose name he called Abimelech. Abimelech is going to be another problem in Gideon's house. He's got many wives. He has 70, 70 sons. So he has 70 sons, perhaps even girls as well. So he's got 80, 90, 100 offspring, immediate offspring, huge family. And that's not enough. He has to go get a concubine, and he has Abimelech. And Abimelech is going to show up in chapter 9, 1 to verse 6. If we have time, we'll briefly mention that at the end. But then it says in verse number 32, and Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And I missed a verse. I want to look at verse 28 again. Thus was the Midianites subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. I love that verse. 40 years from that time, and during that 40 years, Gideon has wives, he has children, he rules the people as a judge. But I love that phrase, the land was in quietness. That word quietness means to be in repose, to be in rest, to be still. Now, obviously, in context, it can refer to the battles. So nobody came and attacked Israel during that time. But I think it's even just a quiet people, a restful people, a still people, a happy people. When righteousness prevails, there's a quietness, there's a stillness, there's a peace, there's a tranquility that pervades. And I love the fact that there's 40 years wrapped up in one sentence, whereas we had whole chapters wrapped up in 36 hours. That's how the Bible works. Sometimes you have massive amount of living wrapped up in just a couple sentences. But there's that quietness, there's that peacefulness, there's people going to the market, there's people planting their gardens, there's people raising their children, there's people who are born and live and die in that 40 years, and because you have a good ruler, they can do it with contentment, they can do it with peace, they can do it with tranquility. Unfortunately, the people that were born before that had awful chaos, terribleness, famine, Midianites coming and stealing the harvest, and yet now you have a good leader, a solid leader. The power of one person to affect entire countryside, the power of one good leader to have this wave of contentment and peace wash over Israel. Just because of one person who said, I'll take God at his word, I'll do what's right, even though I'm not perfect, I will do what's right, and the quietness and the peacefulness that flows from that one person. I was just amazed at that verse. Anybody else have any thoughts on the quietness of Gideon's rule? You're like, well, you got a lot of that one word. Anybody? I don't know if this is it's a wrong application, but I'm going to make it anyway. I think he was a conservative politician. Like, what? When I think of quietness, I think of not a lot of running around advocating for everything and trying to change everything. Do you know why conservatives don't get involved in the school board? You know why conservatives don't get involved in the county board? Do you know why conservatives don't get involved in those type of things? Because we just want to live a quiet life and we don't see a lot of problems to fix. When I drive over to Bob Sturtz's farm, I'm not looking for wetlands for the stork. I'm not looking for problems to fix in society. I think we should just leave everybody alone and let them run their lives. And if there's a problem, then we'll fix it. But otherwise, it's okay. But when other people get involved, they got to fix everything. I mean, how many times have you seen a politician get up and say, you're going to vote for me because I passed all these laws? I don't want you to pass laws. I want a politician to get up and said, I did nothing in Washington. Great, you got my vote. I don't want you to do anything. I want gridlock. I want gridlock. No new laws. I want quietness. So, all right. Okay, going on. Then we have Gideon dying in verse number 33. And it came to pass as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went a-whoring after Balaam and made Baal-bereth their god. And the children of Israel remembered not the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side. Neither showed they kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness which he had showed unto Israel. How sad. How sad. How much of that was because they had the ephod? I don't know. It seems like the ephod also contributed to them going back to Baal. Baal-bereth, I did some studying on that. All it really means is Baal of the covenant, and it was a specific idol that the people of Shechem worshipped. And so I'm not sure what Baal-bereth is, but it's just another idol, another in the long list of false gods, all the way from the molten calf, all the way through the New Testament, where they just cannot get over this idol worship. And as long as Gideon is there, it seems that is kept to a minimum. That is kept down, it's tamped down, and Gideon is keeping them in line. But as soon as he's dead, they don't show any kindness to him, and I don't know what that actually means necessarily, although we'll talk about Abimelech. Now our time is up, so we'll talk about Abimelech another time. But they now take that step. He is the guy who is, in a sense, the dam. He's the guy who's holding back the idol worship, and as soon as he dies, it flows over, and they turn their back on God. Now, we can dwell on the fact that they turn their back on God, and that is obviously very, very sad. But what I want to say is, here is one man who created, or at least was the impetus behind 40 years of Jehovah worship. And that's an awesome thing. That he stood and stemmed the tide as fearful and as timid and as difficult it was for him to lead. He still was the person who stood in the gap and made up the hedge and tried his best. And we see his failures and his successes. And God really used him to hold people back from idol worship. Now, did somebody step up in his place? No, not for some time at least. But he did try. The humility of Gideon, the courage of Gideon, the sunset years of Gideon, you see some problems. He's making an ephod and so on. But for the most part, he finished well. He was trying to affect others. And for that, I am thankful. It is very, very sad to see what the people did after he died. But at least during his lifetime, he tried his best. Any parting thoughts on Gideon? We made it. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Brother Steve? Oh. Yeah. 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 It's such a sad story. Abimelech comes back. He's an adult now. Gideon is dead. And the boys have to be at least 40, or at least a couple of them are 40, and maybe lower than that, obviously. But you've got adult men who are ruling and reigning in that area. And Abimelech comes back. He talks to the city of Shechem and says, do you want these guys to rule over you, or do you want me to rule over you? They choose him. They get money from Baal's temple, and they hire, in a sense, assassins to come and follow Abimelech, and then they go house to house and they wipe out Gideon's family, all 70 of the children, all 70 of the boys. They kill and murder and make Abimelech the ruler. And so, boy, the problems that you have with the innocent, quote unquote, mistakes that we make, you go to a concubine and he has this Abimelech, which obviously at that time was a lot different than it is today, but you do things that you think there's not that much consequence to it. There's not much consequence to having an ephod, but boy, oh boy, when we make those small mistakes, there's a huge consequences. Yes, sir? Exactly right. That's exactly right. Anybody else? All right, let's go ahead and stand. Let's sing. Every time Phil hears me say that, he's like, oh. Come on up, brother Chris. Rock, paper, scissors. Let's sing a favorite song as our dismissal. What's your favorite?
Saved, saved. Do we know that song? I found a friend who is all to me. His love is ever true. I love to tell how he lifted me and what his grace can do for you. Saved by his power divine, saved to new life sublime. Life now is sweet and my joy is complete, for I'm saved, saved, saved. Amen. You are dismissed.